this only has 4 chapters. So it's about him grieving his wife. So let's finish this up, and then at the end of the video I will be showing you guys the next book I will be reading. So stay tuned. But if you haven't subscribed already, what are you waiting for? Give me a thumbs up and subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications so you can get notified every single time I post a video, and obviously you guys will know. So let's get to it. Chapter 4. Okay, this is the 4th and the last MDMS book I can find in the house, at least nearly empty, for there are some pages of very ancient arithmetic at the end by J. I resolved to let this limit my jottings. I will not start buying books for the purpose, in so far as this record was a defense against total collapse, a safety valve. It has done some good. The other end I had in view turns out to have been based on a misunderstanding. I thought I could describe the state, make a map of sorrow. Sorrow, however, turns out to be not a state, but a process. It needs not a map, but a history. And if I don't stop writing that history at some quite arbitrary point, there is no reason why I should ever stop. There is something new to be chronicled every day. Grief is like a long valley, a winding valley where any bend may reveal a totally new landscape. As I've already noted, not every bend does. Sometimes surprise is the opposite one. You are presented with exactly the same sort of country you thought you had left behind miles ago. That is when you wonder whether the valley is in a circular trench, but it isn't. They're partially reoccurrence, but the sequence doesn't repeat. Here, for instance, is a new phase, a new loss. I do all the walking I can, for I'd be a fool to go to bed not tired. Today I have been Still, there are the two enormous gains. I know myself too well now to call them lasting. Turn to God. My mind no longer meets the lockdown. Turn to H. It no longer meets the vacuum. Not all that fuzz about the mental image of her. My jottings show something of the process, but not so much as I hoped. Perhaps both changes were really not observable. There are no sudden, striking and emotional transition, like the warming of a room or the coming of the daylight. When you were first noticed them, they have already been going on for some time. The notes have been about myself and about age and about God, and in that order, that proportion, exactly what they ought not to have been. And I see that I have nowhere fallen into the mode of thinking about either which we call praising them. Yet that would have been best for me. Praise in the mode of love, which always has some element of joy in it. Praise in the due order of him as the griever, as of her gift. Don't we in praise somehow enjoy what we praise, however far we are from it? I must do more of this. I have lost the fruition I once had of H, and I am far, far away in the valley of my unlikeness from the fruition which, if his mercies are infinite, I have some time have of God, but by praising I can still in some degrees enjoy her, and already in some degrees enjoy him better than nothing. But perhaps I lack the gift. I see I've described age as being like a sword. That's true as far as it goes, but utterly inadequate by itself and misleading. I ought to have balanced it. I ought to have said, but also like a garden, like a nest of gardens, wall within wall, hedge within hedge, more secret, more full of fragrant and fertile life, and further you enter. And then of her, and of every created thing I praised, I should say, in some way, in its unique way, like him who made it. Thus up from the garden to the gardener, from the sword to the smith, to the life-giving life, and the beauty that makes beautiful. She is in God's hands. That gains a new energy when I think of her as a sword. Perhaps the earthly life I shared with her was only part of her tempering. Now perhaps he grabs her, the hill, weighs the new weapons, makes lightning within the air, a bright Jerusalem blade. One moment last night can be described as a symbol, in symbolism. Otherwise, it won't go into language at all. Imagine a man in a total darkness. He thinks he is a cellar or a dungeon. Then there comes a sound. He thinks it might be a sound from far off, waves or wind blow trees or cattle half a mile away. And if so, it proves he's not in a cellar, but free in the open air. Or it may be a much smaller sound, close hand, a chuckle or of laughter. If so, there is a friend just beside him in the dark. Either way, a good sound. I'm not mad enough to take such an experience as evidence for anything. It is simply the leaping into imaginative activity of an idea which I would always have theoretically admitted. The idea that I, or any mortal, at any time may be utterly mistaken the situation he is really in. 5 senses, in an incurably abstract intellect, a haphazardly selective memory, a set of preconceptions and assumptions such numerous that I can never examine more than a minority of them, never become even conscious of them all. How much of total reality can such a apparatus let through? I will not, if any, can help it, chin up either of the feathery or prickly tree. Two widely differing convictions press more and more on my mind. One is that the eternal vet is there, is even more inexorable, and the possible operations even more painful than our servant imaginings can forebode. But the other, that all shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. It doesn't matter that all the photographs of age are bad. It doesn't matter, not much, if my memory of her is imperfect. Images, whether on paper or in the mind, are not important for themselves, merely links. Take a parallel from an infinitely higher sphere. Tomorrow morning a priest will give me a little round, thin, cold, tasteless wafer. Is a disadvantage, is it not, in some ways an advantage, that it can't pretend the least resemblance to that with which it unites me? I need Christ, not something that resembles him. I want H, not something that is like her. A really good photograph might become in the end a snare, a horror, or an obstacle. Images, I must suppose, have their use, or there would have not been so popular. It makes little difference whether they are pictures and statues, out of sight, out of mind, or imaginative constructions within it. To me, however, their danger in more obvious images of the holy easily become holy images in images sacrosanct. My idea of God is not a divine idea. It has to be shattered time after time. He shatters it himself. He is a great iconoclast. Could we not almost say that this shattering is one of the marks of his presence? The incarnation is the supreme example. It leaves all previous ideas of the Messiah in ruins, and most are offended by the iconoclasm, and blessed are those who are not. But the same thing happened in our private prayers, and reality is iconoclastic. That earthly beloved, even in this life, incessantly triumphed over your mere idea of her, and you want her to. You want her with all her resistance, all of her faults, all of her unexpectedness. That is, in her foursquare and independent reality, and this not any image or memory, is what we are to love still after she's dead. But this is not now imaginable. In that respect, age and all the dead are like God. In that respect, loving her has become, in its measure, loving like him. In both cases, I must stretch out the arms and hands of love. Its eyes cannot here be used to the reality through a cross. All the changed phantasmagoria of the thoughts, passions, and imaginings. I mustn't sit down content with the phantasmagoria itself and worship that for this mistake as regards people who are still alive, who are with us in the same room, talking and acting not to the man himself, but to the picture, almost the priestess we've made of him in our own minds, and he has to depart from it pretty widely before we even notice that. In real life, that's one way it differs from novels. His words and acts are, if we observe closely, hardly ever quite in character. That is, in what we call his character. There's always a card in his hand we didn't know about. My reason for assuming that I do this other people is the fact that so often I find them obviously doing it to me. We'll all think we've got one another taped, and all this time I may once more be building with cards, and if I am, he will once more knock the building flat. He will knock it down, and often as proves necessary, unless I have to be finally given up as hopeless and left building pasteboard plume palaces in hell forever, free among the dead. Am I, for instance, just sliding back to God because I know that if there's any road to H, it runs through him? But then, of course, I know perfectly well that he can't be used as a road. If you're approaching him not as a goal, but as a road, not as the end, but as the means, you're not really approaching him at all. That's what was really wrong with all those popular pictures of happy reunions on the further shore. Not the simple-minded and very earthly images, but the fact that they make an end of what we can get only as a byproduct of the true end. Lord, are these your real terms? Can I meet H again only if I learn to love you so much that I don't care whether I meet her or not? Consider, Lord, how it looks to us. What would anyone think of me if I said to the boys, no toffee now, but when you've grown up, I don't really want toffee. You shall have as much as you choose. If I knew that to be eternally divided from age and eternally forgotten by her would add a greater joy and splendor to her being, of course I'd say, fire ahead, just as if on earth I could have cured her cancer by never seeing her again. I have arranged never to see her again. I have had to. Any decent person would. But that's quite different. That's not the situation I'm in. When I lay these questions before God, I get no answer, but a rather special sort of no answer. It is not the locked door. It is more like a silent, certainly not uncompassionate gaze, as though he shook his head, not in refusal, but waving the question like, peace, child, you don't understand. Can a mortal ask question which God finds unanswerable? Quite easily, I should think. All nonsense questions are unanswerable. How many hours are there in a mile? Is a yellow square or round? Probably half the question we ask, however great theological and metaphysical problems are like that. And now that I come to think of it, there is no practical problem before me at all. I know the two great commandments. I'd better get on with them. Indeed, H's death has ended in a practical problem. While she was alive, I could in practice have put her before God. That is, could have done what she wanted instead of what he wanted. If there's been a conflict, what's left? It is not a problem about anything I can do. It's all about the weights of the feelings and motives and that sort of thing. It's a problem I'm setting myself. I don't believe God set it me at all. The fruition of God, reunion with the dead, these can't figure in my thinking except as counters, blank checks my idea, if you can call it an idea, of the first is a huge, risky extrapolation from a very few and short experiences here on earth, probably not such valuable experiences as I think, perhaps even of less value than others that I take no account of. My idea of a second is also extrapolation. The reality, either the cashing of their check would probably blow all one idea about both, how much more one's ideas about their relationship to each other, into smithereens. The mythical union of, on the one hand, the resurrection of the body on the other. I can't reach the ghost of an image, a formula, or even a feeling that combines them. But the reality we are giving to understand us, reality, the iconoclast once more. Heaven will solve our problems, but not, I think, by showing us subtle reconciliation between all our apparently contradictory notions, that the notions will be all knocked from under our feet. We shall see that there never was any problem, and more than once, the impression which I can't describe except by saying that it's like the sound of a chuckle in the darkness, the sense of some chattering and disarming simplicity, is the real answer. It is often thought that the dead see us, and we assume, whether reasonably or not, that if they would see us all, they see us more clearly than before. Does age now see exactly how much froth and tinsel there was in what she called, and I call my love? So be it. Look your hardest, dear. I wouldn't hide if I could. We didn't idolize each other. We tried to keep no secrets. You knew most of my rotten places in me already. If you now see anything worse, I can take it. So can you. Rebuke, explain, mock, forgive. For this is one of the miracles of love. It gives to both, but perhaps especially to the woman, a power of seeing through its own enchantments and yet not being disenchanted. To see in some measures like God, his love and his knowledge. We are not distinct from one another, nor from him. We could almost say he sees because he loves, and therefore loves although he sees. Sometimes, Lord, one is tempted to say that if you wanted us to behave like the lilies of the field, you might have given us an organization more like theirs. But that, I suppose, is just your grand experiments are not an experiment, for you have no need to find things out. Rather, you grand enterprise, you make an organism which is also a spirit. To make that terrible oxymoron a spiritual animal, to take a poor primate, a beast with nerve endings, and over it a creature with a stomach that wants to be filled, a breeding animal that wants its mate, and say, now get on with it, become a god. I said several notebooks ago that even if I got what seemed like an assurance of age's presence, I wouldn't believe it. Easier said than reality of last night's experience, not what it proves, but what it was that makes it worth putting down. It was quite incredible, unemotional, just the impression of her mind momentarily facing my own. Mind, not soul, as we tend to think of soul. Certainly the reverse of what is called soulful, not at all like a rapturous reunion of lovers, much more like getting a telephone call or a wire from her about some practical arrangement. Not that there was any message, just intelligence and attention. No sense of joy or sorrow, no love even in our ordinary sense. No unlove. I had never in any mood imagined the dead as being so, well, so businesslike. Yet there was an extreme and cheerful intimacy, an intimacy that had not passed through the sense or the emotions at all. If this was a throw up from my unconscious, then my unconscious must be a far more interesting region than the depth psychologists have led me to expect. For one thing it is apparently much less primitive than my consciousness. Whether it came from, it has made a sort of spring cleaning in my mind. The dead could be like that sheer intellects. A Greek philosopher wouldn't have been surprised at any experience like mine. He would have expected that if anything of us remained after death, it would be just that. Up to now, this always seemed to me a most arid, chilling idea. The absence of emotion repelled me. But in this contact, whether real or apparent, it didn't do anything of the sort. One didn't need emotion. The intimacy was complete, sharply bracing the restorative too. Without it, can the intimacy be love itself, always in this life attended with emotion, not because it is itself an emotion or needs of an attendant emotion, but because our animal souls, our nervous systems, our imagination have to respond to it in that way. If so, have many preconceptions I must scrap. A society of communion, of pure intelligence, would not be cold, drab, and comfortless. On the other hand, it wouldn't be very like what people usually mean when they use such words as spiritual or mythical or holy. It would, if I have had a glimpse, be, well, I'm almost scared at the adjectives I have to use. Brisk, cheerful, keen, alert, intense, wide awake, above all solid, utterly reliable, firm. There's no nonsense about the dead. When I say intellect, I include will. Attention is an act of will. Intelligence is an action, is will par excellence. What seemed to meet me was full of resolution. Once very near the end, I said, if you can, if it is allowed, come to me when I too am on my deathbed. Aloud, she said, heaven would have a job to hold me, and as for hell, I break it into bits. She knew she was speaking a kind of mythological language, with even an element of comedy in it. There was a twinkle as well as a tear in her eye, but there was no myth and no joke about the will deeper than any feeling that flashed through her. But I mustn't, because I have come to misunderstand a little less completely what a pure intelligence might be. Lean over too far. There's also, whatever it means, the resurrection of the body. understand. The best is perhaps what we understand least. Didn't people dispute once whether the final vision of God was more an act of intelligence or of love? That is probably another of the nonsense questions. How wicked it would be if we could to call the dead back. She said, not to me, but to the chaplain. I am at peace with God. She smiled, but not at me. Poi si torno eterna fontana. The end. Thank you guys so much for watching this video and following me through A Grief Observed by C.S. Lewis. Thank you guys so much for watching. But wait a minute. I have to show you the next book. For this one, I hope you guys enjoyed. Just don't forget to subscribe